Untitled Document Part 1. I've always been a bit scatterbrained, especially since starting university. Between the assignments, the group projects, and endless research papers, my Google Drive is a chaotic mess. Untitled documents litter my folders like confetti after a parade. Half-started essays, random thoughts, and forgotten study notes. So, when an untitled document appeared at the top of my recent list, I didn't think much of it. It wasn't unusual. I thought maybe I'd opened a new doc by accident during one of my late-night study sessions. It happens. But this one was different. It was a Wednesday when I first noticed it. My dorm room was in its usual state, textbooks scattered across the desk, empty cups of instant ramen piling up next to my laptop. I was exhausted, running on caffeine and stress, trying to cram in some last-minute revisions for an exam. I needed to focus, to get through just one more chapter, but the untitled document kept drawing my eye. No recent edits. No collaborators. Just blank. I clicked it open, expecting to see a mess of random keystrokes or half-written notes. But there was nothing. Completely empty. A fresh, white page. My cursor blinked at me, almost mocking in its emptiness. Whatever, I thought. Another wasted click. I closed it and moved on. The next morning, it was back. It was early, and I was already running late for my first lecture. My laptop chimed as I booted it up, and there it was again, right at the top of my drive. Untitled. My tired brain didn't have the bandwidth to deal with it, so I deleted it and went on with my day. But it was there again the next morning. And the morning after that. I finally took notice after the fifth time it reappeared. I'd delete it, and it would come back like a bad habit. My curiosity got the better of me. I opened it again, half hoping to find something hidden, a glitch, a note, anything. But it was still blank. I sighed and stared at it, feeling this odd uneasiness settle into the pit of my stomach. I don't know why I did it, but I typed out a single word, hello. I waited. For what, I don't know. A response? A change? But the page remained blank. I closed it, feeling foolish. I had better things to worry about, like not flunking out of school. A few days went by without incident, and I'd almost forgotten about it. Then one night, while I was alone in the study lounge of my dorm, the document returned. It was late 2 or 3 a.m. I was deep in the throes of an essay crisis, my eyes burning from staring at the screen too long. My drive auto-refreshed, and there it was again, untitled document. Not this again, I muttered, but I clicked it, my irritation outweighing my reason. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples, when I noticed something off. The blank page wasn't completely blank anymore. There was a faint texture to it, almost like an impression. I adjusted my screen angle, trying to get a better look. As I tilted it, an image began to emerge, a blurry, shadowy shape embedded in the white. It was like trying to see a figure through frosted glass. I squinted harder, leaning closer, and my heart skipped a beat. It was a face. A distorted, twisted face. I jerked back, blinking rapidly. When I looked again, the document was blank. That's when the paranoia started. I became obsessed. I needed to know what was happening, whether I was losing my mind or if there was something there, something real. My sleep schedule, already fragile, shattered entirely. I scoured forums, tech blogs, even Reddit threads about digital hauntings and cursed files. Most of it was the usual creepypasta junk, harmless stories to give people a thrill. But buried deep in one thread, I found a user who had experienced the same thing, an untitled document that kept reappearing. The post was years old. Their account was deleted. But someone had responded, suggesting it wasn't a bug but a hidden file, accessible only under specific conditions. Desperation does strange things to you. I followed their instructions: dim the screen brightness to its lowest setting, open developer tools, and invert the display colors. It sounded ridiculous, but I had nothing to lose. The air in my dorm room felt heavy, thick with anticipation. I turned off all the lights, my only illumination the dim glow of my laptop. My breath hitched as I executed the steps, my fingers trembling over the keys. When I finally opened the document again, I nearly screamed. Words. Faint and jittery, they appeared like shadows burned into the screen. You found me. My heart pounded in my ears. My mouth went dry. I stared at the words, unable to move, unable to look away. I hesitated, then typed back, "Who are you?" A long pause. Felt the temperature drop in the room, my breath coming out in misty clouds. Slowly, the response appeared. Look closer. My hands were shaking. I leaned forward, my nose nearly touching the screen. The words seemed to blur and stretch, and behind them, deeper within the white void of the document, I saw something else, a flicker of movement. Shapes shifting and twisting, like worms writhing beneath a layer of skin. I recoiled, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, the noise echoing in my silent dorm room. I slammed my laptop shut. For a long moment, I just sat there, heart hammering, mind racing. The room was deathly quiet, save for my own ragged breathing. I should have stopped. Should have shut down the computer, called it a night, moved on. But I didn't. The curiosity was too strong, the pull too intense. I opened it again. This time, the words were more distinct, bolder. Don't look away. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I didn't know what it meant, but I felt the instinctive need to obey. I kept my eyes glued to the screen, unblinking, even as they started to water and burn. And then, I saw it. A new line of text appeared, slowly forming as though typed by invisible hands. I see you. In the reflection of the darkened screen, I saw movement. A shadow. My breath caught in my throat. I turned around quickly, but there was nothing. Just the empty room, a mess of textbooks and clothes scattered everywhere. I looked back at the screen. Don't turn around again. The cold seeped into my bones. I felt like I was being watched, a creeping sensation that crawled over my skin. I wanted to close the document, but I couldn't. My hands were frozen on the keyboard, my fingers numb. I typed, slowly. My heart racing. What do you want? For a long, terrible moment, there was nothing. Then, the text appeared, but it wasn't like before. It was more jagged, the letters uneven as if written by a hand that didn't quite know how to use a keyboard. To warn you. I felt a pang of confusion, mixed with dread. I typed back, about what? The answer came almost immediately, and this time, I swear I felt the words as much as I read them. The sensation was like ice dripping down the back of my neck, about them. Suddenly, the document began to flicker, as though it were glitching. The screen started to shake, and new text flooded the page, hundreds of lines, all in different fonts, sizes, some upside down, others typed over each other. In a chaotic, frenzied mess. Don't look away, don't turn around, it's in the room with you, look closer, don't look away. The text filled every inch of the page, the letters overlapping and merging, forming incomprehensible shapes. Panic surged through me. I slammed my laptop shut and jumped up, knocking my chair over. And then, the smell hit me. A rancid, putrid odor filled the room, something like rotting meat and decay. I gagged, covering my nose. My eyes watered. The shadows seemed to shift around me, darker and more oppressive. I could hear something, a low, wet gurgle, like something trying to speak through a throat filled with blood. I didn't stay to find out what it was. I grabbed my laptop, my bag, and bolted out of my room. Racing down the hallway of the dorm. I didn't stop until I was outside, gulping in fresh, cold night air. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't go back to my room, either. I spent the night in the campus library, surrounded by the dim, comforting hum of the fluorescent lights and the soft, distant chatter of other sleepless students. The next day, I tried to tell myself it was just some kind of hallucination, a trick of the mind brought on by sleep deprivation and stress. University had done a number on my sanity, and maybe my mind was finally cracking under the pressure. I spent hours in the library, my nerves on edge, every sound amplified by the silence of the early morning. I tried to work on my assignments, but I couldn't focus. My thoughts kept drifting back to the document, to the shadowy shapes, the unsettling words, and the stench that had filled my room. I decided not to go back to my dorm. Not yet. I needed answers first. I logged into my Google Drive on one of the library computers, holding my breath, half expecting the untitled document to pop up again. But it wasn't there. I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. I knew I hadn't imagined it, whatever it was. I had seen the words, felt the cold, smelt the rot. That was real. Still, I spent the next few days living in a kind of limbo, bouncing between classes, the library, and a friend's dorm where I crashed on a too small couch. I couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate, and I jumped at every little noise, a door creaking open, a book dropping on the floor, footsteps echoing down the hallways. I was a mess, and everyone could see it. "Are you okay?" My friend Sarah asked one day, eyeing me over her laptop. "You look rough." "Just tired," I mumbled, forcing a smile. "Been pulling all-nighters for the exams." "Maybe lay off the Red Bull," she suggested, her tone light, but I could see the concern in her eyes. I didn't tell her about the document. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? A week passed, and I started to think maybe it was over. Maybe it was just a glitch, a freak, unexplainable occurrence. I even convinced myself to go back to my dorm. I pushed the door open cautiously, half expecting the stench to greet me again. But it was just normal. Clothes on the floor, books on the desk, stale air. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I decided to try and forget about it, get back to some kind of normal. But normalcy was short-lived. On a Sunday night, I was back in my room, finally allowing myself to settle back into the routine of uni life. My laptop was on, and I was listening to some music to drown out the chatter of students passing by outside. I had an essay to write, some tedious analysis on literary theories, but my brain kept wandering. I glanced at my screen and froze. There it was. The untitled document. Back at the top of my recent files. My stomach twisted, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. I hadn't opened it. Hadn't done anything that could have triggered its return. It was just there. I stared at it for a long time, every muscle in my body tense. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend I hadn't seen it. But the other part, curiosity or stupidity, I'm not sure which, compelled me to click. The document opened, and my screen remained blank for a moment. But this time, the blankness wasn't quite the same. It was like the whiteness of the page was too white, too stark, like it was humming with energy. The room felt colder, the air heavier. I tilted my screen, remembering the trick that had worked before, and there it was again. The words, faint but unmistakable, "You looked away." I felt my pulse quicken, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The words seemed more ominous now, more threatening. I typed, my fingers trembling, "What do you want from me?" The response was immediate, and with every letter that appeared, I felt the room's temperature drop even further. "To show you." Show me what? There was a pause. Then the document glitched and flickered. I could hear a low hum emanating from my laptop, like static mixed with distant whispers. Slowly, new words began to materialize, the truth. Before I could react, the screen started to warp again, and the shadows in the white void deepened. This time, the face I saw was clearer, human, but twisted, with eyes that were too large and lips pulled back into an unnatural smile. The skin seemed to pulse, gray and mottled, almost translucent. Veins crisscrossed beneath, bulging and writhing as though filled with something thick and alive. I couldn't look away. My eyes were locked on the screen, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The face began to move closer, the mouth twitching. I could almost hear it breathing through the speaker's wet, labored breaths, like something drowning in its own saliva. I wanted to slam the laptop shut, but I couldn't move. My hands were glued to the desk, my body paralyzed by an invisible force. The face filled the screen now, the eyes staring directly into mine, unblinking, and then, slowly, the lips parted. It spoke, but not in words. It was a guttural, low growl, like the sound of bones grinding together. The noise grew louder, more distorted, and with it came a new smell like burning hair and rancid flesh. I gagged, tears streaming down my face from the stench. And then the screen went black. For a moment, there was only silence. My own heartbeat was the only sound in the room, and I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I dared not move. I didn't even breathe. A single line of text appeared, glowing faintly in the darkness, "Look behind you." My blood ran cold. The fear was suffocating, a thick, oppressive force pressing down on me. I didn't want to turn around. I couldn't. But something deep inside compelled me to. I turned my head, just a fraction, enough to see the edge of my room. At first, it seemed empty. But then I saw it. A shape in the corner, crouched low, too large to be a person, too small to be a nightmare. The darkness seemed to cling to it, like smoke swirling around something solid. It moved just slightly and I heard it. The wet, gurgling breaths from the screen. I whipped my head back to my laptop, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would burst. The screen flickered, and new words appeared, "It's hungry." I didn't think. I just reacted. I grabbed my laptop. tearing the charger from the socket, and bolted out of my room. My footsteps pounded down the hallway, echoing in the empty corridors. I didn't stop until I was outside, my chest heaving, my breath fogging in the cold night air. I ran. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I collapsed onto a bench near the student center, hunched over, clutching my laptop like a lifeline. My hands were shaking, my heart racing. I spent the next few hours sitting there, wide-eyed and terrified, as the campus around me began to wake up. Students passed by, giving me strange looks, but I didn't care. I couldn't go back. I couldn't be alone. I wandered to the computer science lab when it opened, my legs weak and trembling. I found a grad student named Mark who I'd seen around before, a tech wizard, always tinkering with code and breaking down firewalls. If anyone could explain this, it'd be him. I hesitated, feeling ridiculous, but desperation pushed me forward. "Hey, Mark," I said, my voice shaky. "I need help with something weird on my laptop." He gave me a skeptical look but nodded, motioning for me to follow him to his station. I opened the laptop, my fingers trembling as I logged into my Google Drive. My breath caught when I saw it. The untitled document was there again, waiting. I opened it, and Mark's face instantly changed. "What the hell is that?" he muttered, leaning in closer. The screen was flickering again, the distorted text seeping into view. His eyes widened as he saw the words appear, "You brought him." Mark stared at me, his face pale. "Is this some kind of joke?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "No," I breathed. "It's not." The words on the screen shifted again, "One of you will feed." Suddenly, the lights in the lab flickered, and the hum of computers died, plunging the room into darkness. The air grew thick, heavy with that same foul stench of rotting meat. I could hear Mark's breath quickening beside me. "Close it," he whispered. "Close it now." I reached for the laptop, but before I could touch it, a low, guttural sound filled the room, the same grinding, unnatural growl from my dorm. I turned my head slowly and froze. There, in the corner of the lab, the shadow was back. But it wasn't just a shadow, it was a void, a tear in reality itself. The light seemed to bend around it, creating an unnatural darkness that swallowed everything in its path. I could feel it pulling, tugging at the edges of my vision, like it was trying to draw me in, to drag me somewhere else, somewhere I didn't want to go. Mark gasped beside me. His eyes were locked on the shape, his lips trembling. "What is that?" he managed to croak, but I couldn't answer. I didn't know. And the more I looked at it, the less sense it made. It wasn't just black, it was an absence of everything, a hole in the world. Then it shifted. It wasn't a movement in the normal sense. It was more like the shadow expanded, like a drop of ink spreading in water. A creeping cold spread across the room, and with it came a deep, resonant vibration, low and rumbling, like the earth itself was groaning in protest. I could feel it in my teeth, in my bones, a frequency that rattled my skull and sent a sharp, stabbing pain shooting down my spine. Mark clutched his ears, his eyes wide with terror, as blood began to seep from his nose. "Make it stop," he whispered, then screamed, his voice cracking. "Make it stop." The laptop screen glowed brighter, illuminating the dark with a sickly, pale light. New words typed themselves out, one by one, jagged and shaky. "It won't stop until it feeds." I felt the words in my core, like a punch to the gut. Mark was shaking now, his face turning pale, his eyes darting back and forth as though searching for an escape that didn't exist. I didn't understand what was happening, but the sense of impending doom was overwhelming. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice breaking, tears streaming down my face. My question was a plea, a prayer to something that would never answer. Mark didn't respond. He was transfixed by the screen, his eyes glassy. Suddenly, his hand shot out, gripping my arm with a strength that didn't match his terrified expression. His nails dug into my skin, drawing blood. I can't move," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the vibrating hum. His body convulsed violently, his eyes rolling back into his head, and then he stopped breathing. His body went limp, but his hand was still clamped around my arm, his nails embedded deep into my flesh. I tried to pull away, but his grip was unyielding. I looked at his face, his mouth hung open, eyes wide, but there was something wrong with them. They were empty, hollow, like glass marbles. And then I realized with horror he wasn't looking at me. He was looking through me. The vibration stopped, the room falling into an eerie, oppressive silence. I was too stunned to process what had just happened. The only sound was the faint buzz of electricity as the lights flickered back on. I looked at the screen again. The text had changed, "Your turn." I felt a cold sweat drip down my back. I tried to pry Mark's hand off, but his fingers felt like iron. I looked around desperately for anything to break his grip. But then the light around the room seemed to warp again, and that low rumble returned, like a distant avalanche. I heard a noise, a whisper, almost inaudible, but it came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Stay still," the voice was soft, almost comforting. I wasn't sure if I was hearing it or feeling it in my bones. I stopped struggling, frozen in place. And then, I realized the room had changed. The lab had dissolved into a black void, and now I was standing in a different place. No longer was I surrounded by desks and computers, but in what felt like an endless library, a labyrinth of ancient bookshelves stretching up into darkness. The air was thick with dust, and the scent of mold and decay filled my nostrils. The shadows here were deeper, like ink pooling in the creases of reality. I stumbled back, finally breaking free from Mark's grip. I turned, but he wasn't there anymore. In his place stood a figure, a tall, gaunt shape that seemed to waver in and out of focus, as if it were both there and not. Its eyes were voids like holes burned into a photograph, and its mouth hung open too wide, unnaturally wide, revealing a bottomless pit of nothingness. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't obey. I could feel something creeping up behind me, and I didn't dare turn around. The presence was overwhelming, a force that pressed down on me like a weight. My breaths came in shallow gasps, my chest tightening with every second. I tried to speak, to scream, but the words stuck in my throat, and when I finally managed to choke something out, it wasn't a scream. It was a single word, weak and trembling, "Please." The figure moved closer, its limbs bending in unnatural angles, cracking and popping as it approached. With each step, the shadows seemed to thicken, and I could see something moving within them, something writhing, twisting. I realized then that the darkness wasn't just shadows but bodies. Human forms, half-seen and indistinct, writhing in silent agony, their faces contorted in expressions of eternal suffering. They were trapped in the dark, lost between worlds, each reaching out, their mouths open in silent screams, eyes locked in an endless loop of terror. And then it hit me. This wasn't a hallucination. This wasn't some trick or glitch. This was a door, an opening to somewhere else, somewhere we were never meant to see. The figure loomed over me now, its face inches from mine. It didn't have features, just an impression of a face, like something that had forgotten how to be human. Its mouth opened, and I saw something inside, deep within the void, a flicker of something red, wet, and hungry. I had to get out. I had to wake up or break free, but I didn't know how. The air around me grew colder, and I felt my breath freezing in my lungs. I closed my eyes, whispering to myself, "This isn't real. This isn't real." But it was. When I opened my eyes, the scene shifted again. I was back in my dorm room, my laptop on the desk. The untitled document was still open, but the text had changed: "You can't escape."